Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 16th of August 2018. So let's get started. So let's look into the first article. So the first article says the currency turmoil in Turkey. So what exactly is this whole context about? So what we recently see is that there is a lot of economic crisis that is happening with respect to the Turkey's economy, and this has impacted all the developing countries including India, and there is a breach of about 70 per dollar with respect to India's currency, and there is a lot of depreciation with respect to India's currency that is being reported. So what we will understand in this particular article is what exactly are the factors that have led to economic crisis in Turkey, what exactly are the internal factors, the external factors, how exactly is its impact with respect to other countries and its effect towards India. All this will be discussed with respect to this article. So let's try and understand what exactly is the context. So when we look into the context, what it clearly says is that the Turkish lira lost a fifth of its value against the US dollar last week, hitting a new low on Monday before some recovery later in the week. It further says that the currency has lost almost over 40% of its value against the dollar this year. So what exactly is the context now? So the context here clearly goes on to say that the Turkish currency lira has actually collapsed the economy, and it is sending shockwaves around the world. So what we need to understand is because of the worsening diplomatic relationship between United States of America as well as Turkey is also one of the factors as to why this particular economy is going in doldrums. So let's try and understand what exactly this whole dimension of this Turkey economic crisis is all about. So the first thing that we need to understand is something to do with the internal factors. So what we would be able to understand is that Turkey has economic crisis. This is based on two important factors. One is the internal factor, the other one is the external factor. So first let's discuss what exactly the internal factors are. So the first point that we need to understand is the dictatorship or the authoritarian regime. So what exactly do we mean by it? What exactly is happening is with respect to the recent elections and with respect to the mandate that he's got, what he is doing is he's seizing a largest control or greater control over the country's economic policy. So what he has done recently is he has actually appointed his son-in-law as the finance minister. So any country for that matter, we know for the fact that there needs to be an independent autonomy that needs to be given to the central bank, but the central bank in this particular case has been taken away from its autonomy. So his son-in-law becomes the finance minister, and the autonomy that was supposed to be given to the central bank of Turkey is completely stripped off. So what exactly is happening is there is a large scale inflation with respect to Turkey. So next important point that we need to understand is that there is a lot of inflation, and this is about 15% in Turkey. So what has happened is when there is inflation, what we need to do is we need to suck up money from the market. But what exactly is happening in this particular case is we need to increase the interest rate. But in Turkey's case, what is happening is there is decrease in the interest rate that is happening primarily because of the Erdogan's influence. That is, his son-in-law has become the finance minister, and these people are not letting the Central Bank of Turkey act with autonomy, and because they are not acting with autonomy, what exactly is happening is there is low growth rate that has been set by this particular president, and because there is low growth, what is taking up is the inflation. So in spite of the presence of inflation that is there in the economy, what is happening here is there is no increase in the interest rate, but there is low interest rate, and because there is low interest rate, there is further increase in the inflation. So the major point that we need to understand is the authoritarian regime of the President Erdogan here, and at the same time the inflation that is taking up every now and then is not being controlled. And at the same time, what we also need to understand is the current account deficit. So the current account deficit is almost up to 5% of the GDP. So this is also making the economic doldrums within the domain of Turkey. And the major important point when it comes to internal thing is the foreign investors are actually scared. So what exactly is happening is because the economy is not actually good, what is happening in this particular case is all those people who have actually invested within the domain of Turkey, within the domain of Turkey's economy, these people are scared because these people are sensing that all the things that they have invested will not be profiting, and because they are sensing that it is all going in a negative vibe, and because there is almost the economy is going under the negative recession point, what we see is the point that all these investors who had actually actually invested within the economy of Turkey are actually pulling off. And now because they are actually pulling off, what this means is they are investing in terms of lira, so lira is actually being taken off. That is, they are now wanting to take off their money, so they are extracting all the money. That is, the money that they're taking off the country is in the form of dollars. So now because they are actually selling their lira and taking away the dollars, what we have is a depreciation, and that is the value of lira has actually plunged. So these are majorly the internal politics and why the economy of actually Turkey is under doldrums. And the next point that we need to understand is what exactly are the external factors. So when we look into the external factors, what we need to understand is there are this association with respect to the United States. So there is a diplomatic problem with respect to the United States of America, and that is why the economy is again under problem. One of the major things that we will have to understand is that there is one of the important persons called as Pastor Andrew Brunson. So what exactly happened is actually this particular country, Turkey, actually feels that Andrew Brunson was one of those persons who is actually a spy who wanted to overthrow the government during that particular coup which happened in 2016. So the Turkey assumes this Brunson as one person who wanted to overthrow the particular government that was existing back in 2016, and it wanted to take over this particular government. So they see him as a person who is a spy. But what United States of America is actually saying is that he is actually one of those innocent Christian men who is actually propagating Christianity. He is nowhere related to all this spying and so on. Repeatedly, what Mr. Trump and White House has also pushed is that Brunson, who is actually currently taken and put behind bars, has to be released. In number of conversations, there have been repeatedly saying that this person, Andrew Brunson, is not a spy, but instead he has to be released. But in spite of saying repeatedly, what Erdogan has done is he has not actually accepted this particular call, and he still kept this particular person behind bars. So the first important narrative is with respect to Andrew Brunson. So there was a damage with respect to the diplomatic relationship between United States of America as well as the Turkish officials. This is the first point. And next thing that we have to understand is that Donald Trump actually last week said that he would double the import tariffs on Turkish steel as well as aluminium. So apart from the first incident of the Andrew Brunson, what exactly happened was President has actually announced that he'll be doubling the imports. With respect to aluminium, it will be around 20%. Usually we had seen the trade war, right? The trade war did say that the aluminium was actually imposed at 10% tariffs and steel at 25%. What he's further gone on to say, this will be doubled, that the aluminium will be now tariffed at about 20% and steel will be tariffed at about 25%. So the next second factor that we need to understand is the doubling of tariffs. And apart from that, there is also another important external factor. This can be the most important factor. What is happening with respect to Turkey is Turkey was one of areas where all the people from different countries, the investors, let's say for example the United States of America or Europe, and number of people from Japan started investing in developing countries. Let's say for example Turkey in this particular case. What was prompting them to actually invest in developing countries is the interest rate that was being afforded to on all the securities, while at the same time when you look at United States of America or Japan, the interest rate that was given to all the security things was comparatively less. So all these investors who were there started actually putting their money into the markets of the developing countries like Turkey. But what is exactly happened over a period of time is, apart from this, the United States of America's economy has actually become comparatively stronger. Now that it has become comparatively stronger and the interest rates are also increasing with respect to the United States, all these investors who had invested in the securities in the developing countries like Turkey are also taking back their money. Why? Because they simply feel that the bond markets within United States is much safer than in Turkey, and when there is interest rate that is being given by the United States, why do I have to invest in Turkey, is the point that all the investors feel. And now what is happening is that because the economy of the United States is much stronger and the Federal Reserve has actually raised the interest rates, all these people are taking away their money that they had invested in the bonds of Turkey and they are lifting it back to the United States or other developed countries. It is because of this external factors is why Turkey has been facing a lot of problems. So what we need to understand from this article is two things. One is in terms of the internal factors, the other one is in terms of the external factors. So first thing that we also need to understand is what can be the implications, what is its effects on the other countries. The point that we need to understand is why is this causing a financial contagion. So what do we mean by financial contagion? Let's say for example, let's go back to 2008. So did India actually do any of the things when it actually faced the brunt of recession in 2008? Not exactly. All our economic fundamentals were actually intact and it was sound. But what exactly happened was India did feel a slight pain of the recession. So somewhere in United States there was recession and India also did feel it. The simple reason is because we are a globalized economy, and all the globalized economy does is it is interlinked to a number of currencies. Let's say for example, the most counted currency in the world is dollar, and then you have the pound, then you have euro, and lira is also one of those currencies which is placed much above India. Let's say for example, there are different currencies, right? With respect to currencies, what you have is first you have the dollar, and then you have, let's say for example, pound, and then you have what is called as euro, and then you have something called as Japan's currency. So all these currencies are actually stack up. So in case there is a problem somewhere at one point, let's say for example United States, the pain is actually felt in other part as well. So there is economic turmoil that happens. Similarly, what has happened is lira is also one of those currencies which is comparatively placed much better than India. Let's say for example, lira is actually placed at the 16th position. So India is placed at about 18th position. So because it is occupying a much better place, and because it is also one of the global currencies which has its value with respect to the global penetration, it can have the financial contagion. So what do you mean by financial contagion? Something which happens at one place will have its rippling effects in another place. So here the lira is actually having an economic problem because of the internal factors as well as the external factors. This can actually perpetuate the economic turmoil in some other country, and this perpetuation of economic turmoil in some other country because of its internal and external factors that is happening with respect to one specific currency is called as the financial contagion. So what we see in this particular crisis, or the major implication, is there has been a lot of financial contagion. So that's the first point that we need to understand. So what exactly is the implications? So when we look into what exactly the implications are, the problems in Turkey has issues with respect to other countries, and that is the financial contagion. So the next point is, now because there is this rippling effect that happens every now and then, what this can do is this can spark off some concerns in the markets, and this can also send the markets in jittery. So the next point that we need to understand is all the markets that are there in and around are actually counting on stability factor. Now because one currency is actually gone down, this can have a rebellion effect, and this can actually put down number of markets, and markets actually go under that jittery effect. And the next thing that we need to understand is that how is that it is actually surfacing with respect to India. So when we look into what exactly happened with respect to India, we see that rupee has actually breached the 70 mark, and this was actually due to what was happening with respect to Turkey. So what we need to realize is that because it is happening this way with respect in the currency problem, this is also impacted the Indian currency. At the same time, India does not have to worry much. Yes, we have actually breached the 70 rupees, but what we need to understand is that the problem is only with respect to certain minimal level, but it is not the same with respect to the overall economy. Why? Because once we realize what exactly the Indian markets are, the CAD is actually under control. That is, the current account deficit is currently around 2% of the GDP, so it is under control, and also the external debt is comparatively low with respect to India. So because the external debt is actually low and also the current account deficit is actually under control, within the domains of Indian economy, we are not facing much of a brunt. But one thing that is actually gone without our control is that India has actually breached this particular psychological mark of 70 rupees. Another important point is we also need to look at other economies. Let's say for example the BRICS in this particular case. So we did discuss about India's concern, right? I mean, India has actually breached that particular mark, but with respect to other countries, they have also faced the brunt of it. Let's take for example the Russia. So Russia had its currency called as ruble. So the ruble has actually gone under pressure. US had also hit sanctions, so ruble has also felt pressure because of this particular action that has happened with respect to Turkey. And apart from this, Brazilian's real has also faced some problem, that is it has gone down by 4%. And at the same time, South Africa has also faced a problem, that is South Africa's currency, that is rand, has actually felt this particular problem and it has gone down by about 7%. And at the same time, China's yuan has also problem, but what we need to understand is because of the majority control over the economy by the government, it has not felt so much, but it has still felt slight tinge of the pain with respect to the currency depreciation. So what we need to understand as a overall is that there is another important point. What has happened with respect to this economy is, so when there is a particular developing country, the developing country is actually growing, so this actually means that they are also taking money from other banks as well as other important banks from other countries. Let's say for example, with respect to Turkey, Turkey has actually taken money from a number of banks. So you have the investors who are actually investing in the economy of Turkey. But what is happening in this particular case is there are certain people or certain investors who are not actually paying back the money to these countries. So what we see is actually the spread of this default that can actually spread across the entire Europe. So there are few investors and these investors have actually taken money, and this can be from the Italy's Unicredit, or let's say for example the Spain's BBVA, or for example the France BNP Paribas. So there are different number of banks in other countries, and these investors who wanted to invest in Turkey because they have a good developing country now face the brunt, and these people who have taken money from the banks can actually go on a default, and when there is default, the pain is actually felt in the native country. So all those countries who have given money or the loans to these people for investing in Turkey can now face the problems. And now because these people may face actually a default, and in case they default with these banks, what we will see is a turmoil and the whole of Europe can be in a problem. So this can also be a problem, and that is with respect to the loan lending. So what is a major problem is the loan lending that has been given by all these countries to the developers or the investors in Turkey. In case they actually don't pay back or they go on a default, these banks who have given money to the people in Turkey who are the investors will actually face the issue, is what the economical implications that happen with respect to the India as well as to world around. So what exactly are the other things that we need to understand? So apart from this, what can happen with respect to India? So now that the Indian currency has actually depreciated, what we need to understand is what are the negative implications, what are the positive implications. So the first point that we need to understand is what exactly is the negative implications. So when we look into the negative implications, what exactly can happen is our import bill can obviously rise up, and because the price of crude oils are obviously increasing every day, this will further perpetuate the pain of import bill, and our import bill will further increase. And at the same time, this can also flare up the inflation. So because there is increase in the import bill, this can also flare up the inflation. And at the same time, in case there are people who are actually studying abroad, and in case people have to study money to their children, again this will raise up, and all those people who are actually studying abroad will have to get more money for their studying purposes. And at the same time, we also need to look at the positive impact. So the positive impact that we will be seeing is the exports will become cheaper. So this can be a very short term impact, but what we will also see is that exports can actually increase. So at the same time, there have been a number of sectors, let's say for example the textile or the clothing. So these textile or the clothing industry will also see an increase in the exports, and at the same time the tourism sector within India will also increase. So all those people who are planning to come to India, this would be the right time for them to actually come down to India. And at the same time, outbound travel, in case people are actually planning to go out, that segment will actually hit out. So these are the positive and the negative implications. So what exactly has the government said with respect to this? What the government has actually said is that the rupee is obviously depreciating. These are not due to the internal factors, but these are due to the external factors, and there is nothing to worry at this particular stage, is what Arun Jaitley has actually said. And at the same time, that the secretary has also said not to worry with respect to the external economy. It has also said that the Indian currency is still far better when it comes to the other currencies. so there is not a point of problem that we currently are seeing with respect to whatever is happening with respect to the crisis within the economy of Turkey. So this is all we will have to understand with respect to this article with respect to what exactly is the Turkey's economic crisis. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says questioning a crackdown. So what exactly are we speaking about? We will be discussing about the manufacture of oxytocin, how the government came up with a particular restriction that the oxytocin has to be manufactured only by the public sector and not by the private sector. And once this particular notification was released, there was a lot of problems with respect to the health sector. There was not adequate amount of oxytocin, which is one of the important things when it comes to the health things. And what came about was a change with respect to the government stand. So the first thing that we need to understand is what exactly is the context. So when we look into the context, what it clearly says is there was a decision of the Ministry of Health to restrict from September 1 the manufacture of oxytocin only to the public sector, that is Karnataka Antibiotics and Pharmaceuticals Limited, which had sparked fears of shortages and disruption of supplies of drug. So first thing that we need to understand is what exactly is this oxytocin. So oxytocin, which is also called as the love hormone, is actually released naturally within the human bonding activities. Let's say for example, when a man and a woman enters into a physical intimate relationship, oxytocin is released, and at the time of childbirth this is released, and even when there is breastfeeding that a woman actually provides to her children, then the oxytocin is normally released. So this happens naturally, but there are other types where it is used artificially. So when is it used artificially? Let's say for example, the dairy owners or also farmers use this particular oxytocin to actually boost the milk production, and at the same time vegetable producers actually use it to make sure that there is bigger and actually fresher vegetables that is actually produced, and at the same time what is also used in the health setup in order to speed up the childbirth. So these are the basic uses of the oxytocin. But what exactly is the problem area? So when we look into what exactly the problem area is, there have been certain allegations that have been said that in case of use of oxytocin within animals, what it can do is that it will actually ejaculate a lot of milk, that is that it is used for faster secretion of the milk, but this can have an impact with respect to the animals. It can lead to the death of the animals, sometimes resulting in what is called as the infertility in the animals, and this can also cause a lot of pain with respect to the animals. So what the government had did was the government wanted to regularize this whole idea, and they said that only certain public sector organizations will be releasing it. But what we need to understand is the government is actually planning to withdraw this particular movement. What is also being said in this particular article is that there is no negative impact because of oxytocin, that there are certain experts from the medical as well as the veterinary sciences who had actually advised the Drug Technical Advisory Board that oxytocin that is required for the treatment of both humans and animals are not a problem. So what it has said is that there have been two studies by the central government. One is the Indian Council of Medical Research, the other one by the National Dairy Research Institute, which actually concludes that the use of oxytocin does not have any adverse effect on either people or the animals. So what this particular study has actually said, that the government has actually started notifying that oxytocin that is given to all these people are actually dangerous, but what these studies have actually said is it is not dangerous, it will not have any harmful impact with respect to the animals, and at the same time in case there is some problem, it could be only with respect to the addiction, that is the cattle do not actually react to the normal milk ejaculation stimuli. Apart from this, this does not lead to infertility or sterility, and this will not cause deaths, is what this particular study went on to say. What exactly was the basis of this whole judgment or the notification? So when we realize why exactly the government came up with this particular proposal of actually restricting the manufacture of oxytocin, this goes back to one of the important judgment that came up from the High Court of Himachal Pradesh. So the Himachal Pradesh High Court was actually looking into one of the PILs, and this PIL was filed in the Himachal Pradesh High Court. So what it said was there were certain newspaper reports which actually went on to say that there was some misuse because of oxytocin, and because of the misuse in oxytocin, what exactly the judgment said was there was a large scale number of diseases that were increasing the breast and uterine cancers, male impotency, excessive hair growth in women, and also balding of the women. So because there were all diseases because of the overuse or the misuse of the oxytocin, what the Himachal Himachal Pradesh High Court did was, it said that there needs to be certain restrictions. So it said that there needs to be certain restriction imposed. It did not say ban this particular oxytocin, but instead it said that what needs to be done is there has to be some restrictions, and this restriction has to be taken care by the government. But what did the government do? Instead of looking at it, what the government did was it completely banned the manufacture or the production of this particular oxytocin. And what was most important point is the court actually did not actually cite a single scientific evidence to support their claims. So it passed a judgment. Obviously, when it is passing a judgment, it has to look into number of scientific bases, number of reports, but instead of looking at all these reports, what it did was it just passed a notification, it just passed the judgment, that the judgment said that all these things have to be restricted because there is some diseases. But what needs to be done is, ideally you need to look at the scientific evidence, but instead the scientific evidence that was supposed to be looked at was not actually taken care when the judgment was passed into this particular case. And at the same time, what we also need to look at is, how can the government take this particular stance? Okay, the central government has to always look at it from the scientific basis. Just because the judgment has been given and just because the judgment says that you will have to restrict it, there has to be an independent stand that also needs to be taken by the central government. Even in fact, in case the central government actually takes a stand, there can be a counter view that the court can actually go about saying, so what exactly is the court can take? So the court can actually take a particular stand which is actually different from the stand that is taken by the government. Let's say what exactly the court says with respect to the Union of India and the PIFZA with respect to the 2017. So what the court in this particular case says is that in case the government has actually taken a particular stand, the court in this particular case can actually strike it down, or it can put aside this particular stand that has been taken by the government. Why? Because if it is not exercised on the basis of a particular scientific data, or it is based on irrelevant material, or the basis of consideration of a particular material is actually falsified, or it is redundant, or it is not in lines with the scientific basis, if all this is done and the government has put up a particular notification, the court in this particular case has actually clearly said the court would be able to strike this down, or in this particular case it would be able to set aside in case the government has released a particular notification and this notification does not have a particular scientific base. So in case there is a notification that the government has released and this notification has no scientific base on its own, in case it does not have any scientific base on its own, the government, whatever notification it has released, would be set aside or it would be struck down, is what the Supreme Court has actually said with respect to the Union of India and PIFZA with respect to the 2017 judgment. So what exactly is the conclusion bit? So when we look into what exactly the conclusion bit is, what we need to realize is any stand that the government takes in the future will always have to be on the scientific basis. It is not on a particular court judgment, or it is not on a few PILs that have been raised, but instead a scientific basis, a rational approach, a number of reports that has to be substantiating this particular notification. And at the same time, the government should conduct all the scientific basis with respect to a particular institution, and this institution has to give its report only after a particular report has been given by this institution, which is of government repute and international repute. Then only it can take up this particular notification, is what this article goes on to say. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article is with respect to the SEBI, and recently what we saw was that there was one of the recommendations that have been released by the TK Viswanathan Committee recommendation. We did look at it at the earlier classes, but what we will be looking is what are the other recommendations that are given by the Viswanathan Committee and what exactly are the concerns that have been raised. So what exactly is the background? So when we look into the background, what we realize is that there has been lot of front running, insider trading, shady accounting practices that are actually tantamount to windows dressing firms' performance, as well as shenanigans to manipulate share prices continuing. So because there is a lot of problems with respect to the market that is seen, what the government had done is it had set up this Viswanathan Committee. So because there are lot of problems, there is insider trading that is happening, there is frauds that are happening, because there is lot of issues with respect to SEBI as well as markets. That is why Viswanathan Committee was actually appointed. So the Viswanathan Committee, which looked into all the problems that are happening with respect to the market, has actually given certain recommendations. So let's try and understand what exactly are the recommendations. So one of the things that it has actually said is, with respect to whatever is happening with respect to the functionality of the SEBI, it has further increased the powers that has has to be supposed to be given to the SEBI. One of the things that it is said is the SEBI needs to be given powers with respect to how it acts. So it has said it is not only acting towards the listed entities, but it is being given powers to aid all those financial fraud, including the accounts and auditors. So apart from the listed one, what it can further go on to do is it can go at the unlisted ones. Why is it this power given? Only because in order to make sure that the financial markets are intact, in order to make sure that there is no fraudulent means to actually buy the money within the financial markets. So one of the basic thing is what we need to understand is that there are certain listed companies, there are certain unlisted companies. So what the SEBI was given powers is to look at the listed companies, but now from now on it can also given the powers set such a way that it is also able to look at the financial fraud in terms of the accountants as well as the auditors. And at the same time, the panel has also suggested the SEBI rather than the central government is to be given the powers to grant immunity to the whistleblowers. So who are those whistleblowers? Let's say for example there is a particular person who actually senses that there is some problem within the financial market. So he feels that there will be large number of people who would have an impact with respect to whatever is happening within the financial market. So he actually comes over and he says that this can have an impact in public. So this person has to be protected. So what the Viswanathan Committee recommendation has actually said is that in case there are whistleblowers who are actually there, so these whistleblowers will have to be protected by the SEBI, not by the central government. These are one of the recommendations that has been said. And apart from this, what it has also said is that it would be able to tap the phone calls. This we have already discussed with our earlier classes. And apart from this, what it has further said is that instead of the Ministry of the Corporate Affairs, it is the SEBI which should be able to take much better actions. So in case there is certain actions that needs to be taken care, there needs to be actions that needs to be initiated by SEBI and not by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Why exactly has it said? One of the basic reasons as to why it has said this, in case it is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, there would have certain political connections with all these people who are doing influential trading, and apart from this there would be political influence. This can actually stop the particular influence. But when it comes to SEBI, SEBI is actually autonomous and it is something independent. So in case it is SEBI which is taking an action against these people, it will act independently and it is not like the dependency of the corporate affairs. So there is independent stand that the SEBI can take. That is why this recommendation says that SEBI has to take care of all this rather than the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So apart from this, what exactly this recommendation has said is the SEBI is able to understand the complex things that are happening in the financial market. It is able to understand all the diversity with respect to the financial market, and it is able to understand how exactly the frauds work rather than the other investigative organizations or the agencies. So because the other investigation agencies not understand much than the SEBI, all the powers that needs to be given are to be given to the SEBI because they understand the complexity behind the economy. The other organizations do not understand it, but because SEBI is only involved in the financial market, it would be able to understand the complexities. So because it will be able to understand the nuances of the complexity and how exactly the market frauds are happening, what we need to make sure is that SEBI is given all these powers are something that the recommendations have been set by the Viswanathan Committee. So what we need to understand is, yes, we have understood that there is a lot of problems with respect to the financial market and all these recommendations are also fair and fine, but there are certain concerns. What exactly are the concerns? In case there is too many restrictions and in case there is lot many restrictions that the SEBI has actually goes on diving, what it will actually do is it will actually scare away a number of people, and this can actually scare away a number of genuine people who are actually wanting to invest. So there are investors who are wanting to invest in the financial market. If there are too many restrictions, in case there are too many restrictions with respect to what SEBI is doing, what it will actually do is it will scare away the number of investors. And at the same time, what we need to understand is, let's go back to what exactly happened few years ago. So it says that few years certain restrictions on all these people just because the government actually forced. Though there wasn't a formal investigation that was done, there was wasn't an authenticate information or a report that was actually produced. It was just because the government initiative actually said that there was a money laundering that was happening. What the SEBI had actually did is it restricted or imposed certain restrictions on all these investors. What should have ideally done is it should have taken about an investigation, it should have seen about a number of reports, it should have appointed a particular committee to see if there was actually a financial fraud or there was money laundering actually happened. SEBI did not do all this, but instead what it did was, just because the government said, it actually laid certain restrictions. So apart from this, the SEBI has also actually planning to cap on trading by actually retail investors based on their certain net worth. So what is exactly happening is there are few people who are wanting to invest in the financial market. So they have a particular net worth, and only on the basis of their net worth they would be able to invest in the market. But what is happening is, let's say for example there is this person who actually invest much more than what is happening in with respect to his net worth. In this particular case, what SEBI can further do is it can actually harass a particular investor, asking him, how did you actually get this money, how did you actually enforce this particular money, have you done some corruption. So it can go about harassing a particular investor. So what we need to understand is, yes, the recommendations are fair and fine, but at the same time there needs to be a check and balance with respect to its restrictions as well. So there needs to be another authority who is actually looking at it, or in case there is a financial fraud, there needs to be a particular check that the SEBI is actually doing, rather than only harassing. So what we need to do as a whole is, on a conclusion bit, in case we are giving more teeth to the enabled market regulator to fulfill certain primary roles of protecting the investors, this is completely fine, but at the same time there needs to be critical empowerment to check the right tools that have been provided, so that there is no domination by the economy by the SEBI, and at the same time this does not actually curtail the freedom of the investors. So this is what we need to understand from this article. Stop misuse of consent route for tax benefits SEBI panel. This is a very important article, but what we will be doing is we will be discussing this article in the future, simply because there is one of the panels that has been set up under the chairmanship of the Supreme Court former Justice A.R. Dave to review the consent mechanism that has been highlighted. So as of now we do not have a clear picture of this particular report, so we will be taking up this particular report in the near future, but as of now you don't have to worry about it. Just focus on this particular article, just read about it. We will be discussing in detail once again about this article in the future. So moving on, let's look into the awareness. A Buddha will travel back after 57 years on page 1. India-China armies meet in Ladakh on page 10. Assam rejected move to string area under AFSPA on page 10. Tea exports to China park rise on page 14. Sai to protect trainees from sexual harassment on page 17. Earth to stay exceptionally hot until 2022 on page 18. All these important articles can act as a fodder for your minds, so kindly look at these articles. Okay, so kindly look into the BYJU'S CNA, look into both the practice questions of both pre as well as mains. Put all your answers on the comment section so that we can evaluate and give you the relevant feedback for the same. So this is it for today. Thank you so much. All the best.